as people are joining. We can't see you, but we are here to present the Climate Adaptive Design Studio to the public as part of our Earth Week celebration, our festival. So we're just waiting a few minutes for people to join. Welcome, everybody. All right, so we are now streaming live on Facebook. My name is Dana Levenberg. I'm the supervisor of the town of Ossining. I just want everybody to know we're going to wait a few minutes before we get started with our Climate Adaptive Design Studio, and I'll open with introductions of everybody that's on today, and then we'll hear a little bit of a presentation, and then we'll get to everybody's questions if there are any. So I'm just going to give a couple of more minutes for people to join. And I'm going to see if I can find out if people are joining. Hi again, it's Dana Levenberg from the town of Ossining. I'm going to introduce everybody in just a few minutes for the Climate Adaptive Design Studio as part of our Earth Week celebration and education. And Victoria, I know that you're there watching, and if you could just text me if you see that there are a bunch of people on and if it's a good time to start. We're just about 1 minute after 12, although my computer clock says that we're 6 minutes after, so I start to panic, but we're not 6 minutes after. So
Supervisor, I see 4 people in the attendee section. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to, I can see those people too, I think, now that I see 5. Okay, wonderful. All right, and we have a fantastic selection of attendees that are part of Green Ossining, which is the sponsor extraordinaire and organizer, I should say, of our Earth Day festivities this week. So thank you, shout out to Susie Ross and to her team, Green Ossining. She's also now running Ossining 100 to learn about our carbon footprint and how we can all take responsibility for our own carbon footprint. I see our former mayor of the village, who was very involved in the Climate Adaptive Design Studio, who's now working for Senator Elijah Reichlin-Melnick. Thank you for joining. David Margulies, who's one of our trail stewards and recently joined our EAC, or Environmental Advisory Committee. Drew Gupta, I think, is also part of Ossining 100, maybe also part of Green Ossining, I'm not 100% sure. And Jaime Martinez, who's a planner for the village of Ossining. So welcome to all of our attendees. Thank you for joining. And I think that we can probably, if we're good to get started, we'll get started at 3 minutes after officially 12. So again, my name's Dana Levenberg. I'm the supervisor of the town of Ossining, and I'm joined by Maddie Zahach, who's the assistant village manager for the village of Ossining. Together, the town and the village applied for a grant to host, or I guess it's sort of a grant, but we applied to be hosts to the Climate Adaptive Design Studio in 2019 through Cornell Architecture. I think I knew it as architecture when I was there, but the architecture program and the landscape architecture and design program at Cornell, which is a graduate program. And we had the ability to partner with third-year landscape architecture and design students, which was fantastic. And Josh Serra, who's the professor of landscape architecture and design, I think, I'm not sure if I'm getting your title totally perfectly correct, but pretty close. Was the lead on this and has been responsible for shepherding this program through in other communities such as Kingston, Piermont, Hudson, and Catskill. We wanted to have a chance too. We'd been looking closely at how we could make some upgrades to a town-owned park, Lewis Angle Park on the waterfront. And as we were doing that and we were looking for ways that we could sort of come up with a master park plan, we started thinking about climate change, sea level rise, and all of the other long-term impacts. And we knew that we had a lot of work to do if we wanted to plan correctly for making the changes that were thoughtful and forward thinking. So we applied for the program and we were happy that we actually won, and we have lots of great things going on in Ossining. And we're certainly proud of a lot of the work that we've been doing in both the town and village. But we knew that it was important to focus on the issues of sea level rise and of climate change and how they would impact our waterfront, complete waterfront, not just our park, but all along the Ossining waterfront going forward. We have a lot of important assets down there, and obviously access to the Hudson River is one of the biggest assets that we have. So we didn't want to put our heads in the proverbial sand, yes, pun intended. We wanted to embrace what we saw as threats and opportunities. And we thought by doing so with the CAD studio that we could get there. Thanks so much to Liz LaJudas, who is one of the consultants that's been with this program with the CAD studio. And she's her company is Resilience Communication and Consulting, and they've helped Ossining also communicate out with our public. So we had a lot of work that we did with our entire community as we hosted the CAD studio. And I'm going to turn it over to Maddie Zahach to say a few words from the village, and then we can hear from our leaders, from Professor Josh Sarah and from Liz. Take it away, Maddie.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Levenberg. I'm so excited to see so many folks on the call today. And I want to also thank Liz and Josh for all the expertise that they've shared with us over the years that this project has sort of been in the mix. So I know that you're about to see some exciting stuff today when Liz and Josh talk you sort of through what the project was and what some of the students brought forward in terms of how we can apply some of these great ideas to the waterfront. As the supervisor mentioned, the village as well as the town, have property that's either directly on our waterfront or, sort of within a stone's throw, a couple blocks away. And some of the things that we learned through the CAD studio in particular having to do with the potential impacts of sea level rise are actually being discussed in real time now. As some of you might be aware, the village owns a property a couple blocks away from the waterfront proper called the former DPW site. And as we sort of look towards redeveloping that, many of the ideas that were discussed during the CAD studio, particular to how sea level rise might affect buildings on the waterfront, have been incorporated and widely discussed with the community as we go forward in planning that project. So I'm really excited to see everybody here today. I will not take any more of your time, but thank you again. And I will turn it back over to the supervisor, I think, to get us started.
Well, I just want to give a shout out because I see that the mayor of the village, Reek 11, has also just joined as an attendee, as has our village manager, Karen Dottori, and we are very excited that they're part of it. And I also just wanted to say that the other opportunity this has given us is to sort of join a wider group of communities up and down the Hudson that are part of the Flood Resilience Network. And this opportunity will also hopefully lend itself to other grant funding in the near future with other communities that are CAD studio recipients, I guess you could say.
Alumni,
and,
yeah.
Right. So we're hopeful that this is going to open up other doors for us and also let us partner with communities on both sides of the Hudson. And I know that I'm personally looking forward to one of the big communities joining the CAD studio group this year. We'll see what happens because the application just opened up, I think, for this year's CAD studio applications. I think that we skipped last year for some variety of reasons I think we could all come up with. But anyway, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Liz. I'm going to turn it over to Liz. Yes. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you so much for that introduction. That was wonderful. And I'm going to share my screen so we can get the presentation up here. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see the presentation? Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that really great introduction, and thank you very much to the Town and Village of Ossining for inviting us to participate in Ossining Earth Week. This presentation is meant to introduce the Climate Adaptive Design Studio and also hopefully to encourage people to go to the Metro North Station and see our exhibition of I think 6 or 8 posters that really detail the studio itself and then the students' work. Today, we are planning to give you an overview of the studio and how we operate, and also then to talk about some of our design strategies using the student work as illustrations. So many of the graphics that you see in our presentation are actually the work of the student designers who participated in the Ossining CAD studio in 2019. And the Climate Adaptive Design Studio is really a partnership effort. And the main partners in this effort are the Cornell University Department of Landscape Architecture, as Supervisor Levenberg mentioned, the New York State Water Resources Institute, which is also located at Cornell University, and the Hudson River Estuary Program, which is part of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And we just wanted to start out introducing ourselves and letting you meet the design studio team. We see a number of people we know on the call today, on the webinar today, but just in case you're not familiar with us, I'm going to introduce myself and Libby Zamitis, who is not here today, but is an integral member of the team, and then hand it to Josh to introduce himself as well. So in this picture, you see the 3 of us with Nancy Richards from the Village of Catskill, and the Village of Catskill was the first CAD community. We did the Climate Adaptive Design Studio there in 2015. And since then, as has been mentioned, we've been working our way through different riverfront communities in the Hudson Valley. And I'm Liz Lowe-Judas. I am the principal of Resilience Communications and Consulting. I'm an environmental educator and science communicator with a background in working for nonprofit organizations with environmental focus, as well as county level government. I worked for Cornell Cooperative Extension in Greene County for 11 years, which is how I met Josh. And throughout the course of my career, I've worked very closely in partnership with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Hudson River Estuary Program, and continue to work closely with the climate team. And Libby Zamitis is now the coordinator of the climate change team for the Estuary Program. I'll talk a little bit more about what kind of services the Estuary Program provides in the climate change realm as we go forward. But right now, I'll just pass it to you, Josh, to introduce yourself.
Okay, well, thanks again for this opportunity to speak today. It's really a pleasure to see people again, the folks from the Town and Village of Ossining, and as partners in past work together, and also to have a conversation today with Liz, who's been a long-term partner, and it's great to see Libby up there. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture here at Cornell. It's my 10th year. I can't believe it, but it is, and it's been a good run. I come from prior background in practice and in teaching to Cornell, and so I'm really glad to be here, and I look forward to sharing some of the things that we did and the conversations we had when we were in Ossining in 2019.
Great, thank you, Josh. So just very quickly, in case anyone's not familiar with the Hudson River Estuary Program, it's a non-regulatory part of New York State DEC that's been in operation since the late 1980s. And it's, as its name suggests, it's focused on the estuarine portion of the Hudson River, so from Troy down to New York Harbor. And it's working to achieve 6 key benefits in our region, including clean water, resilient communities, the vital estuary ecosystem, fish, wildlife, and habitat, natural scenery, and education, access, recreation, and inspiration. So there are 6 different teams at the Estuary Program, and they're all working very hard towards restoring and preserving the assets that we have here, the many, many assets we have here in the Hudson Valley. The Resilient Waterfront, or climate change team in particular, has a focus on adaptation to climate change. So there are other agencies within New York State, including the Office of Climate Change and NYSERDA, that are working with communities on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigating climate change. But the Estuary Program climate team really focuses on adaptation. And the climate hazards that the climate team is focusing on in the Hudson Valley are several trends in our climate, including increasing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and rising sea levels. Increasing temperatures leading to change in our weather regimes, and particularly heat waves and warmer temperatures. Changing precipitation patterns leading to short-term, or even in some cases long-term drought, and also increased flooding from heavy rainstorm events, and then of course flooding related to rising sea levels. And the long-term vision of the climate team is that Hudson Valley communities are thriving and beautiful models for adapting to climate change using nature-based solutions. So really focusing on a lot of the functions that natural landscapes provide for us in cooling our temperatures and controlling stormwater and reducing erosion and other benefits that nature provides that we can both learn from and mimic in our built environments. And we feel really firmly that communities can adapt to climate change, and we can empower ourselves to not wait for the path to be shown to us to move towards adaptation, but actually start to forge our own path to have our communities become more ready for climate disturbance. And we can do this on a community scale or a landowner scale or a business scale. And that we're really aiming for resilience, which is we see as the ability to thrive under change, and rather than just bounce back from disturbance, to actually plan ahead and try to improve the conditions in our communities now so that we can improve conditions for all of our parts of our community, all of our neighborhoods, all of our residences, as well as the natural environment itself as we cope with and respond to climate disturbance. And so part of the way that the Estuary Program is striving to help communities become more resilient is to create an adaptation project pipeline. And we know that there are many scary and intimidating parts of climate change that we all need to grasp and cope with. So one of our first steps is to try to inspire and educate communities to understand the climate risks and be inspired to take action for our own vitality in the future. And that certainly is part of where the CAD studio fits into this pipeline. And then design and plan is another place where it fits in, because we're thinking about ways to streamline solutions and link our local municipalities with other resources from other levels of government, as well as other sectors, to be ready and plan and design our own futures. And then to activate and implement through funding and support to help communities actually implement ideas that are created and designed in the earlier steps. So the Climate Adaptive Design Program, as I said, is really part and parcel of this pipeline idea. And it's a collaboration with the landscape architecture students, as well as the local communities, to to create ideas, some of which have been award-winning design ideas, and then create opportunities for communities to evaluate and advance some of these design ideas. So as Supervisor Levenberg mentioned, we've been operating in 5 communities in the Hudson Valley so far. We hope to continue to add more host communities from the Hudson Valley in the CAD program, but we've operated in Catskill, Hudson, Kingston, Piermont, and Ossining. And in 2019, the Estuary Program was able to provide $225,000 grants to CAD host communities to work with engineering and design firms to advance design ideas and really to engage the community in thinking about what they'd like to see on their waterfront. And as I said earlier, we're really a partnership program. We partner with nonprofits like Scenic Hudson, governmental agencies like Department of State, quasi-governmental local government like Cornell Cooperative Extension, and many other partners to bring this program to life. So I'm going to hand it to you, Josh, to talk a little bit more about the studio.
Okay. I was going to just spend a few minutes talking about the studio and what we're about and how we're configured with some of our partners. But before I do that, I just want to just talk a little bit about design education and just sort of situate the studio as a place where we can do work, we can do things. And so for those of you that may have a design career, you learn a lot of technical things in landscape architecture. You learn about site grading and drainage, you learn about plant selection, you learn about many different kinds of systems, energy, transportation, resources. But you also, and you also learn a lot about design theory. But design is a practice and landscape architecture is a practice. So just like law, medicine, engineering, architecture, there's a path to licensure. And so you need, as a practice, you need to practice applying these skills, this knowledge to get better. And so that begins in the studio, in the design studio. So the studio actually is a course. It's a 5-credit course, which is higher than most courses. And what it does is it allows students to apply that knowledge, those skills they've learned, and to configure the work. And so this is where we are. And we had a 3rd-year graduate studio, LA 7010, when we were working with Village and Town of Ossining. Next slide, please. Thanks, Liz, for advancing those slides. I appreciate it. And so I guess if I was going to talk about our efforts in Ossining, and also generally, I really want to, it's important to just spend a minute on the Hudson River estuary. This is actually an image from Scenic Hudson. And it's an incredible place. You already know this because you're there, but it truly is amazing. It's so visually striking. It has vibrant communities, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it also has incredible natural beauty, but also natural assets. As a river that has a relatively low grade elevation change, it is connected to the ocean, and it's tidally influenced all the way 150 miles up the river from the mouth in the New Jersey, New York Harbor, all the way up to the federal dam at Troy. And so that means in places like Ossining, there actually are several feet of daily tidal fluctuation happening for quite some time. And so what that means is, in addition to those marine influences, it's also with tide, it's also subject to sea level rise and surge and some other things. But on another kind of flip side of that, it has incredible ecological asset and value. That mixing of water, fresh water from the upper parts of the basin and some of your contributing streams, even in your own place that you live, your own municipality, merges or blends along this gradient with ocean water. And what that means is that some places are heavily marine in terms of salt concentration. Some are almost freshwater or even entirely freshwater up and down the Hudson. And so tidal freshwater estuaries are globally very unusual and rare. wetland types that exist in there, particularly, and also the wetlands that are more brackish and are also very, very high value. It's an incredible fishery. I continue to be amazed about the kinds of things we find out about the ecological assets here that are incredible and also sensitive. Next slide, please. And at the same time, we have 85 communities of people, 85 municipalities. I think it's over 85 up and down the Hudson estuary. And it's an incredible collection of people and history and lives. There were histories before a settlement in America that were also thriving civilizations for many, many, many years prior, and then also that connectivity, that connectedness to the river continues to this day. People appreciate the river. They appreciate how it defines their bioregion, how it's a place that's memorable and can be an asset. And many people are proud of where they live and what it means to them. And so we try to take some of that inspiration in addition to the physical and ecological setting to the design table when we work together. Next slide. And at the same time, this place, as Liz mentioned, is subject to sea level rise, and the challenge is at hand here. I believe these are images from locations other than Ossining. That's a projection on the bottom right, a projected flood scenario, or actually it's a sea level rise inundation scenario. And then also up above, some of the acute flooding that many of you are aware of as those that know and work and live or play along the waterfront. Next. And so how do we do this work then? How can we actually talk about both people and place? And so I think actually as we imagine how we might adapt, we should be doing both of those things. We should be engaging people and we should be engaging place during the design process. If we're not, we're only working with half the material. This idea that we can enhance our ecological and physical capacity if our community's adaptive capacity and our network of people that are in the loop on these ideas that bring different resources to the table are also part of the conversations as we chart a path forward. Those two things are self-supporting. And so the design studio tries to bring both our physical and ecological knowledge to a place where the communities that join us are also sharing what they know in the work they're doing and the work they'd like to do moving forward. And so that's the foundation, the fundamentals of the studio itself. Next slide, please. And so I'm just going to go scroll through a few different slides because the program has a few different pieces operating. There's really three key pieces. The first one, and arguably the most important, really is about the community. These are people that have found a way to connect to us, to step up and participate with us as neighbors, as city staffs, as business members, as non-government organizations that have an interest in their waterfront, to really talk with us and engage with us about paths forward. The second one is the Dec Estuary Program that Liz mentioned, another key partner that really brings not only knowledge in ecosystems and climate outreach relationships, but also some of the policy and permitting knowledge as we imagine possible scenarios. And then finally, we have the students in the studio themselves. Next slide. And that's really the studio that involves, like I said, the students, myself, and also all the people that work with me on the research side. All of these three key elements must come together, and each team member, if you will, each component of that, we hope our goal is to have benefits that kind of arise or that develop by collaborating together when we engage in the studio. Next slide. And so it's about building a culture of adaptation. We think about this a lot, and we think about it one municipality at a time. And our goal really is to link that studio with those municipalities to imagine new places and new opportunities on many of the same sites you already know, and how to work with those things. And I really asked two questions at our first meeting, and we'll spend a minute talking about the meetings in a few slides. But I mentioned two things. I asked two questions. And this sort of, I like to think it sets the tone for what the studio is about. It's this idea of, first, what are your concerns about climate change? And then secondly, what is your vision for what you want your waterfront to become? Both of those things need to come together. We need to combine those kinds of ideas to find ways to inspire cities and municipalities to thrive by acting now. And so we talk about all of those elements that are kind of bundled up in both of those general topics. And I like to say on the third bullet below that I like to say that sometimes I initially thought maybe our studio products, our design products, the alternative strategies that each student develops was maybe our best asset, sort of the best, had the highest value to the municipalities we partner with. But along the way, I learned that in addition to our products, I think our process may be as useful, as important, or even more important, because what it does is it really encourages that stakeholder interaction on these topics and really builds capacity for communities to dialogue about these things with knowledge to imagine a future for their waterfront moving forward, one that they can get behind and also that is informed. Next slide. And so when we talk about benefits, I wanted to just show this slide because these benefits are, we hope, are very real. That involves those conversations that happen during our process about opportunity and change. Another benefit that I made reference to is about knowledge within the community about some of the climate risks and some of the climate hazards that are present. And then also the tools or approaches, strategies that cities may use in order to adapt. And then also coming to the table with community members have different ideas about funding access and resources. Some of those come from DEC, other resources and knowledge comes from those who participate. And so we hope that we have greater, we enhance awareness and capacity as you look at different adaptation concepts and principles, and think about how those might be incorporated into your future work. And so a lot of those are about the process. And I also, I need to say and want to say that the student work is really, I continue to be amazed about how incredible our students are in terms of coming up with new alternative design strategies. And those are in hand, those are available to the municipalities we partner with for use here and beyond. And some of those are actually on exhibit, as Liz mentioned, for Earth Week already in Ossining today. Next slide. And so there are, I hope it's clear that there are community benefits. We're also looking for education and research benefits. Those three things, that trio of benefits is what we strive for. These alternative design strategies, the capacity building, the technical assistance that can fall from this work is something that's there for the communities. I'm also thinking about the techniques for climate adaptation and how to improve our engagement strategy. And then students really develop new skills in climate adaptation. And then also the benefit of engaging with people like you, people that have perspective and have an important investment in their waterfront, and how you work with diverse members of an audience in order to imagine futures that can work is really what I hope the students come away with. Next slide. And so there really are three basic steps. I mentioned that first visit, we actually have a larger group meeting, kind of see where we were in the, I think it was the high school library while we were there in Ossining on the bottom left corner. You might recognize that waterfront and some people in there. There's a number of our students and a number of us that are on this call and in this webinar today are present in that upper one. We often have those two key questions that I mentioned earlier, our concerns and also our vision for our future. and that happens in that first meeting. We like to have opportunities for smaller conversations as well. I think there's an opportunity to learn in smaller groups too. The second meeting, after that first meeting, what we do is we go back to the design studio, we go back to Cornell, we go back to Ithaca, and we gather all that information we found. We've had a chance to visit the site. There's a lot of technical information that's out there too. But I would say that what we learned from the community is as or more important in some ways. You all are experts in your community. You know how your city operates, how your municipality operates, and also how the waterfront operates and could moving forward. And so we like to take advantage of that by really thinking about that quite carefully in between the first and second meeting. That informs our early design concepts that we share in visit number 2. And again, seeking your expertise, your opinion, your knowledge in that second visit where we share those initial ideas. And then finally, the open house that occurs on visit number 3, where we often that's open to the public or to a larger audience, where we share our final design work. Okay. I think that's
so. Yep. So we're going to talk specifically about some of the work in Ossining, and I'll just start by saying that as a relatively new program, prior to our studio in 2019, we had worked in communities that we had an existing relationship with, and in part of the program development. And in 2019 was the first time that we actually put out a call for communities to submit a letter of interest in the CAD studio. And we got a good number of letters of interest submitted. And we were just so impressed by the submission by the town and village of Ossining. I mean, to start with, it was the first time we had received a joint application from 2 municipalities working together, which we thought was really cool. But then also, you know, that the letter of interest was just really well done and comprehensive, and the support letters was really impressive. And so we were really excited to come to Ossining and to learn more about the town and village and your interest on the waterfront, and to work with you. So, you know, thank you for applying. It's been a great experience for us to work with all of you in Ossining. And just as a quick review, this is a photo of the third-year graduate students that comprise the CAD class in 2019. And, you know, we really ask a lot of these students. I'm continually impressed with the complexities that they have to consider within their designs and within their work, and how they really embrace all those complexities. So on the left, you see our study area, which is a pretty large portion of the waterfront, starting at Chatham Yacht Club on the north, and all the way down to the Sing Sing Correctional Facility in the south. And then some students even looked a little further south. And I mean, within that study area, there is recreational use and access, and parks and residences, and the tributary, and post-industrial use, and cultural things like the museum, the Sing Sing Prison Museum, as well as like the oil transfer facility. So it's really a complex waterfront for the students to engage with. And they were considering some things that we would think about as typical landscape design concepts, like plantings and circulation, transportation and access, and recreation. But then we were also asking them to consider this question of flooding, which you are all well aware of, the flood risk that currently exists on the Ossining waterfront, with the intense rain events that we're experiencing causing tributary flooding, as well as problems with stormwater runoff. And then we're also coping with rising sea levels and storm surges from big hurricanes like Superstorm Sandy. And so, you know, we have this term, the 100-year flood, and that can sometimes be confusing, confusing terms, because we think that maybe it's just a flood that happens every 100 years. But the 100-year flood has a 1% chance of occurrence in every year, which when you start thinking about something like a 30-year mortgage, that's a 25% chance of having a flood that would impact residents or business in the 100-year floodplain. And we also just want to point out that the lines that are drawn on the FEMA flood map indicating the 100-year flood is based on historical data. And as we move into the 21st century, we're really looking to projected data to understand the possible sea level rise risk that we face in coastal areas. So New York State has adopted, officially adopted sea level rise projections to the year 2100. These projections are within a range. Because we can't say for sure, none of us can say for sure exactly what the future holds. But in the New York City lower Hudson region, we, and the high side of the projections, we could be looking at as much as 75 inches or more additional sea level rise by 2100. And just so we wanted to spend a minute just sharing what that means on the ground with some flood maps. And these maps were generated by the Hudson River Flood Impact Decision Support System tool, which is an interactive mapper that's available online for anyone to use. And we have links at the end of this presentation, and we can also put them in the Q&A for people who are interested in exploring these maps on their own. You can look at locations all through the Hudson Valley using these mappers. And this particular image is a composite of 3 different time periods and sea level rise projections showing like a no flood scenario. So this is just a daily occurrence without a flood. All the way over to the left, you can see the print there that this is projected towards the end of the 2020s with sea level rise of as much as 12 inches. So that map does not look too different than what we see on the waterfront today. But the middle map is showing the high projections for the 2050s, which is I believe 30 inches of sea level rise. And you start to see these areas of blue that are indicating inundation, where there may be standing water during high tide or even during low tide levels. So towards the north of our study site, you start to see inundation, and then also around the correctional facility as well. And then all the way over to the right, the map is showing, again, no flood conditions in the 2080s with 60 inches of sea level rise. And you can see a real difference there, where we are seeing the different colors in blue, and the different colors of blue are indicating different depths of water, with the lighter blue being 1 to 2 feet of water, and the darker blue being like 2 to 4 feet of water. And so then if we take that same approach and, we take a look at the 100-year flood, or 1% possibility per year of flood conditions. In the 2020s, we see the 100-year floodplain somewhat as it is today, with inundation depths anywhere from the lighter colors showing 1 foot of coverage of water during a flood event, all the way up to the darkest colors being 6 to 8 feet of water during a flood event. And then the middle map again is the 2050s. So we start to see a larger area of the waterfront, covered in water during flood conditions and also greater depths. And then you can see in the 2080s, the yellow and green colors are shallower depths, and the darker blues are greater depths. So we're really seeing some very, very serious flooding during those 2100 years, with the darkest blue being over 6 feet of flooding, of floodwaters. And so I just wanted to point this out as well, because when we'll be looking at the student designs shortly, and often when you see on the right, we see this rendering that students provided that shows an awful lot of green on the Ossining waterfront. And when we look at the Ossining waterfront today, that might seem like it's just an impossibility. But the students were tasked with designing their final designs for that 2080 time period, with 60 inches of sea level rise. And so when you look on the left and you see the extent of the flooding during the 100-year flood, it starts to make more sense why the students might be looking at greening the landscape when they're using nature-based solutions to increase resiliency for the Ossining waterfront. Many of the student designs were phased, and so they're looking at those 2020, 2050, and 2080 time periods and thinking about how Ossining can transition into this a more resilient waterfront, whether it includes many different types of adaptation. But many students chose in the end to really think about how nature could be an asset to Ossining in coping with future flooding. And then I'm going to hand it back to you, Josh.
Okay. And I'm going to try to move quickly so we can have a little bit of time for questions at the end. And so if you see clarifications after, please do. We felt one thing I just want to say is that each of the students' alternative design strategies are available on a website we'll show shortly. And then also the CAD exhibition that's down on, I believe it's at the train station, if I'm not mistaken, is also there, where you can see some examples of the student work. And so rather than go into each one of the student designs, I thought I'd share a little bit of some of the takeaways we found with our efforts with municipalities, some 5 key takeaways that I'll go over quickly here, and then also some of the design strategies that came up as we were working with Village and Town of Ossining. And so the first part is about design principles. These change. There's no rocket science to these. We adapt these with every community that we engage, but we found that these 5 principles seem to come up over and over, and it's a good way to think about your waterfront. And there's no rocket science here, but I want to share them. The first one is that if you're going to design a waterfront, you should design a waterfront. And so when I say that, it's really about maximizing the value of what your waterfront can be. It's really important to think about what are the kinds of activities, of resources, or assets that really focus, that are best suited for the waterfront. Maybe they're enhanced by the waterfront. Maybe they're dependent upon them. Focusing on finding those and elevating those on your waterfront will continue to make your waterfront useful and valuable moving forward. Next slide. In combination with all the principles I'll talk about. The second one is about design for flooding. Working with water is really, really important. We can talk about flood adapted landscapes and flood adapted structures, but it's important to be thinking about the 3 elements of imagining a future with climate change. The first one is, one possibility is reinforcement, and the willingness to accept the risks and costs of trying to reinforce with levees and so on for assets that are very critical. That's one option. The second one is to adapt, and that is about looking for ways of working with water, letting water in, but also helping it go out in ways that are helpful and useful, and allow waterfronts to go back to work or back to the uses and assets they had before. And the third one is strategic relocation, thinking about assets that could be moved farther uphill, if you will, to avoid some of the risks of flooding. We need to be thinking about those three things when we design in a waterfront scenario. Next slide. The third one is, actually, this is an older slide. It should say design with community, because that's what we do. We do design with community. We not only design with them in mind, but we're looking for that feedback, for that input. And this changes, the goals for the community change with every municipality we work with in terms of where their interests are and what their needs are. But a few things we found, or two things we found that we think are really important. The waterfront should be universally accessible. We hear that over and over, accessible to both visitors and to neighbors and people that are citizens of, in this case, village and town of Ossining. And then secondly, it should be decidedly memorable. We want this place to be an asset to a city. And so how do you make a waterfront with impact so it actually is a contributor to the future of the municipality we're working with? Next slide. This one is about designing with nature. This idea that a healthy Hudson is good for us and for the greater ecology. Sure, we want to enhance these sensitive ecosystems. We want to find ways so that they can continue to work and operate. Those systems can operate amongst our systems. And that's really, really critical and important. We also can take advantage of functioning and healthy ecosystems to help our city, your city, the place you are, the waterfront, work better and more effectively through the ecosystem services they provide. Next slide. This one is about designing for change. And this is really about two things. The first one is that this waterfront is critical, in this case in Ossining, really, really valuable to what the city is and its identity and how it works every day, and how people recreate every day. And so how do you build that value? When you talk about adapting for a future, this waterfront needs to be valuable today to the city. It also needs to be valuable in the 2050s and the 2080s. So how do you work with a design concept that continues to work forward and contribute to the city? I often joke with my students, they think they come into the studio thinking they're going to design one project, but they really are designing 4 or 5 different projects at different timestamps as we look at the projected risks and hazards. And so this feeds into another really important point for municipalities along the Hudson. It's rare where major changes to waterfronts can happen tomorrow, or even in 10 years or 20 or 30. And so it's really important to phase in these ideas, to think about how this work can be phased in over time and continue to be an asset is key. Next slide. And so those are sort of the 5 key principles. We came away with 6 or 7 ideas that were discussed openly with those that participated, and I wanted to point those out. These are available in what's called the Climate Adaptive Design Lookbook, the Ossining Lookbook, which is publicly available. We'll show a website here, put it in the chat in a few minutes. But the main strategies, these are about design strategies that sort of came to the front or rose to the top as people were discussing futures in Ossining. The first one is about resilient waterfront parks. Waterfront parks really are an excellent choice for flood-prone areas. They can offer recreational opportunities, shoreline access, wildlife habitat, and can also reduce vulnerability and risk. And so as a strategy, they can accommodate floodwaters and also be graded to drain water after storm events. So this idea that there's a pre-flood and a post-flood and how to work with those and to be cognizant of those. All of these parks should be designed with input from users and members of the community, so it works with meeting their needs. And I mentioned universal access, we talked about a couple different parks that are down at the Ossining waterfront, and these are considerations as we look at them. The second one is, next slide, sustainable shorelines. These are really alternative methods for stabilizing your shoreline in ways that use techniques other than riprap, bulkheads, and other hardened structures. Those hardened structures may provide the shoreline protection, but they don't provide a whole lot of other assets. And so these ideas, this notions of sustainable shorelines provide shoreline erosion control by incorporating living material like vegetation, plants, instead of hardened material only. So how you put those together, there's an example on the bottom there, I think from Hunters Point Park South down in New York. It provides not only that erosion control, but the additional benefits of habitat enhancement and recreational and aesthetic amenity. The third strategy is strategic, next slide please, relocation and adaptive reuse. And again, you can learn more about each one of these in the lookbook that we'll share the link to. These are options to consider for properties and assets that face a high risk of loss or permanent damage. And they can, I mentioned strategic relocation earlier, they can include strategically locating these assets out of the flood zone, but may also include adapting these features to flooding and flood recovery when we think about adaptive reuse. And so as we look at the next slide, flood adapted structures, this is about being prepared for flooding. And it can include elevating a structure or elevating utilities within a building so they're less impacted by flooding. And it can include sealing a structure, kind of flood proofing, dry flood proofing as it's sometimes called, or redesigning spaces so water can enter and leave quickly out of structures. That's what's called wet flood proofing. Next slide. We also think about resilient roadways and infrastructure that considers whether key roadways or other transportation features are at risk of flooding for use for critical access and during emergencies. And so along with that is that roads with culverts or bridges with small openings below can contribute to flooding by restricting flow, if not size, for certain storm events. And so this strategy is really looking at these issues and developing options. Adapted proposals can incorporate multiple types of movement as well, such as walking and biking and cars, as well as other features such as green infrastructure and other amenity that I'll get to as the last design strategy. Next. And green infrastructure really is about capturing water and infiltrating it into the soil before it enters culverts and into streams, where it can contribute to flooding, but also degrade stream banks and ecosystems. And so how, as a strategy to consider, this is something that you can do to reduce some of those impacts. And examples can include rain gardens, vegetated swales, infiltration planters, and other features that are compatible with their setting, with their surroundings. And it can also include ways to reduce the amount of impervious surfaces that generate runoff, such as parking lots and other things, if there's a fit. We wanted to just highlight those strategies. Liz.
So I think we'll skip these slides because we're just about out of time, and we want to have time for questions if anyone has them. We can also answer questions via email after the session is over. But we just do want to point out that right now the Estuary Program has local stewardship planning grant available to Hudson River estuary communities with a deadline of June 2nd. So that opportunity is coming up. As well as if you know anyone from other communities, I know we've already received some help from Supervisor Levenberg with this, that might be interested in becoming a climate adaptive design studio host community. Our deadline for the fall 2021 semester is coming up on May 10th. And these are the links that we can also provide after this session, that you can go and learn more information about the Climate Adaptive Design Studio and actually download student designs and the lookbook and the exhibition. And also the bottom link is for the mapper that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So thanks to everyone for their attention, and we can see if we can eke in a few Q&As before the end of the session if anyone has any questions for us.
Mostly I'm just seeing compliments. Oh, here we go. Why was 2080 chosen as the final design target? I'm reminded of the Native American concept of taking actions today that would benefit the next 7 generations, from Drew.
I can answer that. Liz, you may have some comments too. We were looking at the 2080s for a couple of reasons. One is there's limits to what we can project. So that's a consideration. We knew that we were looking, one thing that we think about is being prepared for the worst. And so we were looking at the high scenario. You remember that chart that Liz had. And so we were looking at the 2080s for that particular reason. There's different timestamps that were available. 2020 seemed way too soon. 2100s was on the table for us, but it was something that we, we're thinking out to, of course, but we're most focused on some of the key timestamps that were with the available data, the 2020s, the 2050s, and the 2080s. Liz, I don't know if you have more you want to add there.
Nope, that's, I think you covered it.
One of the things that bringing stakeholders in gave us an opportunity to do was we brought Metro North in, and that was a critical partner, I think, in this. And I think that hopefully they were able to take some of the learning back to their leadership. And we know that's a key component is the Hudson line and how that's going to be impacted in not really that long. And we know it takes a lot of work to elevate even a couple inches, I think, the train line. So that's something that's going to need to be done without, otherwise the train line would be negatively impacted. We think that that's critically important for our communities along the Hudson.
Yeah, we agree.
I know you do. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. Should we just give couple more minutes? I don't know if there's anything. I haven't seen anything on Facebook. I've been trying to monitor. I don't know if there's anybody out there that wants to put a question up on Facebook. We'll happily take that as well. And I know that you also tried to incorporate answers to frequently asked questions into the presentation. So we're hoping that people got their questions answered, even if they didn't know that they had them. So,
and I can't, the chat is disabled, so I can't put our links into the chat, but we'll follow up with you all and give you those links if you don't have them. So if anybody's looking for them, or I know you'll also post this to YouTube, so maybe we could put the links in the YouTube comments. So if people want to access them from there.
And there is another question that's what's next for the program in Ossining? I think we heard a little bit at the beginning that we're already taking the some of the design concepts, the maps into account to as the village is moving forward with its comprehensive plan and its design of the DPW site. They're looking at a lot of the maps and maybe some of the suggestions that had come out of the studio. And I know that again, as we move forward with any future designs for Engle Park, that we're also going to be taking those designs into account. And we're hoping again that can help us potentially get some more grant money to for future designs that sort of take the designs to the next step. And then we can work with those moving forward. So, I mean, I don't know if Liz or Josh, if you wanted to add to that.
Just to say that we mentioned early in the presentation, the grant funds that have been available in the past to the CAD host communities, which is a very small pool of applicants. And we're hoping and we're optimistic that funding will become available again, and we would be delighted to see an application from the town and village of Ossining in that grant opportunity. And I see a couple other, thank you so much, Victoria, for Garrity for attending, and we appreciate that you enjoyed the presentation, and we will be sharing those links. So thank you very much. And Susie.
So, and Susie Ross is, yeah, so Susie's our Green Ossining chair, and she just wanted to say a big thank you to Liz and Josh. Again, we're happy that we were able to present this during Earth Week, Earth Month, Earth, soon to be Earth Day, as Lunch and Learn. And we know that it's been recorded and it'll be posted and available so everybody can take a look. And as mentioned a couple of times, we do have the designs, the sort of the smaller version of the lookbook that's available online. But if you want to see some of the big posters, they're available from 5 a.m. to about 10 a.m. So you got to be an early riser at the Ossining train station in the depot there, and make sure that you stop by and get a chai from Ashok and Preeti. They make some really great chai, and they have lots of breakfast stuff too, because you're going to be hungry for breakfast when you go look at those posters. And we do have all 8 of the posters up, so hopefully I'll have a chance to take a look at those.
And thank you. And before we sign off, I'll just say that, we kind of barely scratched the surface of all of the different assistance and programs that are available to municipalities from the Hudson River Estuary Program. And I see that we have Megan Lung from the Estuary Program on the webinar today, and she's awesome. And she works with communities on evaluating flood risk, as well as the ability of aquatic organisms to migrate through culverts and bridges. And she works with Cornell and other partners to help communities put together a culvert management plan with identifying culverts that are of greater flood risk or are barriers to aquatic migration. And so she's saying that if the town wants to think about a culvert management plan, you can reach out to her, and I would be very happy to provide you with her contact information to discuss that further, that
We'll
opportunity.
take it. I'll be calling you in 5 minutes, Megan.
All right, well, thank you so much. Okay.
So again, thanks so much, everybody. I think that we got through everything and we're at the end of our time. So I just, again, want to thank Josh, Sarah, and Liz LaJudas and the Village of Ossining, and everybody else, and Libby in absentia, because you've all been such great partners. And of course, a big shout out to all the incredible landscape architecture students. I think we had 15 of them, maybe, and they really produced some incredible visionary designs for Ossining. And I think we all wish that we could figure how to do all of them. But instead, we're going to hopefully come up with solutions to what our waterfront might look like by 2080 by working hard at protecting our fantastic Hudson River asset and our access to it in the months and years ahead. So thanks again for your partnership, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And please make sure that you go to the Green Ossining site to check out all the other opportunities this week to participate in learning how to protect our Earth. And also you can, again, check out all the other assets that are available through the town and village websites.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Have a good afternoon.
You too. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank
See you
you.
Sure. Bye-bye.